As you might know, just going by you clicking on this video, Disney released a trailer for the new Artemis Fowl movie coming out next year in 2019, and it is, well, for one thing, it's an extremely short trailer, so this is not gonna be a takedown of Disney, it's not gonna be a takedown of the movie that hasn't come out yet, because I feel like it's sort of not a good idea to go on an in-depth critique of a movie that has yet to hit theaters. But there is some stuff that's been pointed out about just the framing of the movie in general that has got a lot of people kinda annoyed about things or feeling a certain kind of way. I want to look at what Artemis Fowl is and what it isn't, and what gets lost in adaptation when you try to take a round object and fit it into a square hole. Yeah, I really should have thought this through before going in with that metaphor. So, without further ado, why are people so angry about this thing right now? So, if you haven't read the books, Artemis Fowl is the story of a 12-year-old child who comes from a criminal mastermind family who decides to kidnap a fairy and ransom the rest of the fairy population for their gold because he wants to continue in his father's name of being a crime lord after his father was supposedly murdered by the Russian mafia. And Disney looked at that story and went, yeah, we're gonna adapt that. That fits our model. That's us to a T. So as the trailer came out and different details about how they were going to adapt it came out, a lot of people who grew up loving these books, myself included, got a little bit freaked out by the Disneyfication of the thing. So straight in the first chapter of this book, Artemis threatens to kill a man and then actively almost murders a fairy by poisoning her to blackmail her into giving up her people's secrets. Yeah, so how is Disney approaching this character? Who is Disney's Artemis Fowl? Let's take a look at the casting call. At first glance, Artemis could be mistaken for a rather ordinary child with little athletic ability. Same. But his eyes reveal a flickering of intelligence, inquisitive and possessing both academic and emotional intelligence. He is highly perceptive and good at reading people. Most importantly, Artemis is warm-hearted and has a great sense of humor. He has fun in whatever situation he is in and loves life. Like, does he use his emotional intelligence to kidnap people? Disney. So I'm not going to sit here and talk about literally every single point of why and how Disney's framing of Artemis is yeah, no. But I actually just want to talk about adaptation, and specifically adapting challenging material, because the first couple of books of Artemis Fowl are actually, I would consider, fairly challenging. These are like not happy books. They're actually pretty dark as far as kidlit goes, and I think that there's a value in that I think in the broader pop culture narrative we're sort of maybe undermining a little bit. So the casting call for Artemis has been going around online, and people have widely been making fun of it for obvious reasons. People have also been sharing the headshot of the actress that they chose to play Holly, which we'll get to Holly. Like, oh man, I mean, just right up front, taking a character who in the book is described as having nut brown skin and casting someone who looks like this, insert picture. Like, yikes. And we'll talk about the whole aging thing later, but believe me, we will talk about Holly. So, now that I've rambled on about the trailer for like, not even talking about the trailer, now that I've rambled on about Artemis Fowl for like 14 minutes, which hopefully I will cut down to a coherent 3 minutes of intro, let's actually look at this thing. So first off, I actually kind of want to do a bit of a defense of Disney. Not a full, like, Disney did nothing wrong, because I think I've made it pretty obvious that that's not how I feel about this. But I do kind of want to give them a little, because some of the criticism that I've been seeing, I feel, is getting a bit into the internet rage monstering thing. So the first thing I want to talk about is Commander Root. Commander Root in the books is this angry, like, middle-aged man with a very abrasive, I was in the war in Vietnam sort of attitude. The fairies, as far as I know, were not in the war in Vietnam, but he's got kind of that mentality, that old sergeant sort of feeling. So for the movie, they cast Judi Dench. And I actually think that this is okay. I see a lot of people who are angry about it for a story beat reason, not just because, you know, casting woman where man was is bad. The cat's gonna knock it over literally everything at some point during this video. So the reason why people are mad about that, or the reason why people are stating that they're mad about that, is because in the books, a big part of Holly's character was the fact that she was the first female officer to join the Leprechaun, LEP Recon team. And Emrys, I swear to God. Yeah, sorry, my cat. Anyways. So being that she's the first female officer on the Leprechaun squad, there's a lot of pressure. She had this mess up in Hamburg a few months, I think months, before the main action takes place. And so, you know, casting a woman as Commander Root, suddenly that's no longer part of the story. There's no longer this aspect of, oh my gosh, you're the first woman to do this thing. And I think that's okay. I think that the storyline of woman is first to do thing in military is a storyline that just works better in 2001 when the book came out than it does in the year of our Lord 2019. I'm okay with that aspect of Holly's character being taken out because I never thought that that was the most important aspect of her character in the books. It's sort of brought up as setting when she first walks in, and there's even like some calling out of the kind of hyper-masculine culture that would result in that being a thing. But no, so on the whole, I think that Judi Dench playing Commander Root, that is fine. Let's just leave that lie. I don't think that that is a problem. And I really like the casting of Butler. I thought that in the trailer he looked pretty cool. Had a bow and arrow, that's exciting. I don't think that was part of the books. But I wasn't mad about it. I think that they did a good job with casting in that regard. I thought that the quick shots of Haven that we saw looked really cool actually. Again, not how I envisioned them in the books, but I thought that they did something kind of interesting, and I'm really excited to see how that's going to play out on screen, so there was that. Look, Artemis Fowl is a really hard book to adapt. There is just so much stuff in these books that even when I was a kid, and when you're a kid, you want every single one of your favorite books to be translated into a movie medium so that you can play the main character. That's just how it works. I cast myself as every character I ever read about. But there's a lot of stuff in these books that just does not read well. I couldn't, even as a kid, I could not imagine it reading well on camera. They have a dwarf that eats dirt and shits it out. Who's apparently played by Josh Gad. Are they gonna stick with the books on that one? Because that's... So circling back to why I made this video in the first place, which was because I read the casting call for Artemis Fowl and proceeded to bore every single one of my friends and family, ranting about it for like 2 weeks. And then I was like, maybe I could just make a video, and next time I want to rant about it, I can just send them the link and get views and that sweet, sweet YouTube money. Yeah, that's not gonna happen. No one's gonna watch this. So the whole, like, what I thought the whole point of these books was when I was a kid was that Artemis Fowl is just straight up a bad person. Like, especially at first. He is not a good person. He is not a good human being. Like, at all. At all. The moments where he shows, like, base humanity in the first book could probably fill up about maybe 2 pages. 3, 4, that's a cat. Marley! Like, again, I've already talked about the fact that he threatened to kill someone twice, 2 different people in the first chapter. I've talked about the fact that he literally kidnaps and emotionally and psychologically tortures the other main character, Holly. Like, we won't even get into the stuff that he does in the other books. Like this one where he goes up against the Russian mafia, and he's actually sort of heroic in this one, so I'll give him a pass. But this one, where he panics so bad about the fact that his dad wants them to be a happy, normal family, that he's like, well, not until I do this one last major crime that's gonna fuck with so many people, and gets his best friend killed, and then stuffs the body in a freezer so that he can have Holly bring his friend back to Disney, the child stuffs the body of his best friend in a freezer. And this was the book series you wanted to adapt? Like, there's a whole scene in here where 2 hitmen bury someone alive, thinking that, like, that's definitely going to kill them, not realizing that they're burying a dwarf, so it's haha funny because he can get away. But if you take away the context of he's a burrowing dwarf, so it's fine, they bury someone alive in this book. So Artemis Fowl is a bad person. He's just straight up not a good person, but the narrative doesn't give him excuses for it. You know, it gives him reasons. It kind of explains why he is the way he is, but it never says, well, he's this way because of this and therefore we can't blame him for it. No, the narrative straight up punches him in the face. More than once. Like, he's a kid from a criminal empire and his dad is presumed dead in the first book, and his mom has an emotional breakdown where she stops recognizing him as her child and essentially leaves him to run the household and the estate at 11 years old. Like, that's fucking dark, and that is a fair reason-ish to be a certain way. But they're not excuses. And the books never act like they're excuses. And what's especially interesting is that the narrative does not forgive him on the basis of being a child. It doesn't say that just because you're a kid, it's okay that you do these things. In fact, it's saying just because you're a kid doesn't mean that you don't know better. and that you shouldn't know better, especially if you're a super intelligent kid. Then you should especially know better, and you should especially try not to let a shit world and shit circumstances turn you into a shit person. That was the entire arc of these books. The entire point was that Artemis was not a good person. The books, to me, spoke to a very specific brand of person, specifically a very specific brand of child. So these books were specifically for kids who were intelligent enough that they don't really feel like kids necessarily. But they are still kids, so they still have that childlike wonder and sort of wanting to believe in fairies and wanting to believe in hidden realms and such, even if the hidden realms turn out to have fairies with shotguns. Maybe especially because the hidden realms turned out to have fairies with shotguns. Like, that's part of the appeal. Artemis Fowl was a rare thing, like a rare book, because it saw asshole children, asshole intelligent children. And that's not as common as you would think. There's a lot of media that sort of seeks to represent intelligent kids and smartass kids, but it's always with this kind of reverence. There's no reverence for it in Artemis Fowl. Yeah, he's cool and he's fun to read because he's super motivated, but at the end of the day, whenever he is an asshole, the book makes sure that he suffers for it. And that does not happen often in kids' media. You know what you get when you mix a kind of veneration for the intelligent asshole child without any kind of comeuppance for being a jerk? You get the Book of Henry.
Henry, remind me again why we can't put you in a gifted school.
Because it's better for my psychosocial development for me to interact with a peer group in a normal school environment.
Oh, yeah.
I guess I could just set you up with direct deposit if that's easier.
I don't know. I'll have to ask Henry.
You have to ask your 11-year-old?
I don't know how you do it all by yourself.
Come on, I have Henry. Find me another male of the species who's more grown up than him.
I'd like to.
And I'm so worried that Artemis Fowl is gonna turn into the Book of Henry. Like, if you look at the Book of Henry, which I really suggest that you don't, but if you do, you see the story of this kid who's just a prodigy and smarter than everyone else, and a complete jerk who clearly thinks that he's above other people, who is venerated and turned into a Jesus allegory and never sees any kind of consequences for his actions. Like, he dies, but he dies of plot disease. And it's so that we can all feel really sad about how cool this kid was. Maybe a bit misguided because he was still a kid, but he was just like so cool. Treating his mom like a 5-year-old, and that, damn it, Janice, why won't you deal with the child abuse of... God, that was such a bad movie. So yeah, there's this idea of the intelligent asshole kid, the villain, who's entertaining to watch, and we want to see him get the upper hand all the time and never really get called out on his actions. Sometimes there will be a moment where it's like, hey, maybe remember that other people exist, but it's usually undercut. Artemis Fowl does not do that. He genuinely becomes, over the course of 8 books, I don't have The Last Guardian on me right now because I read it in 2012 and then I put it down somewhere and I'm not sure where it is anymore. But he genuinely becomes a fairly good person, and that is, wow, so interesting of a storyline. Why couldn't we have had that? Every single moment of redemption for Artemis is earned. It is incredibly earned, and it is hard earned, and sometimes it doesn't end well for him anyways just because of things that he did that was terrible beforehand. So even though he's done something good now, and he's just about to have something good happen to him as a reward for being a good person for a hot 2 seconds, a lot of times he undermines himself just by having previously been a bad person. And that's kind of cool. Like, I feel like it's just so much more interesting to watch a story about a bad child who was not given any fucking leeway for being a child become a good human being and a good adult-ish. I think he's like 17 at the end of the last book, 17, 18. It's been a while, and I was going to read all the books before making this essay again, and then I didn't, so sue me, I don't know what I'm talking about. So when people are protective of him being terrible, it's not just for the fun of him being a terrible person. We're not sitting there trying to protect the sanctity of villainy. We're trying to protect the sanctity of growth. All right. Now I'm gonna talk about Holly. So a lot of my feelings about Holly are coming out of pure conjecture at this point. Again, the movie has not come out yet, so aside from a headshot, we really don't know what Holly's gonna look like. We don't know how she's gonna play on screen. We don't know what they're going to do to her character, what they're gonna do to her character. And I do think we should talk about the whitewashing for a few seconds because, again, we don't know if they're going to CGI Holly in and maybe make her look the way that she does in the books that way. But even if they did do that, that's still kind of gross. Like, at the end of the day, a 12-year-old white girl does not a 20 to 30 plus woman of color make. All right, so let's just put the whole why the fuck would they whitewash Holly in a box in the corner right here, just as a glaring, like, this is kind of the worst thing. And just keep that in mind as I go through the rest of it. Like, that I think is more important than some of the other points that I'm going to make. But okay, I've talked about it about as much as I probably should. So the next thing that people are a little bit concerned about is, why is this adult woman now a 12-year-old girl? And I have a theory of why they're aging her down. So now we might have to talk about shipping for like a hot 2 seconds. So I tried to track down evidence of this in terms of just backing up my point, and it was kind of hard to track down because the internet of the 2000s was not, you know, you couldn't just look up a hashtag at that point to that extent. But I'm pretty confident in saying that for the children reading these books, the main ship would have been Holly and Artemis, which is uncomfortable when you take into account, again, the fact that Artemis starts off as a 12-year-old psychopath and Holly is a grown woman. And I say this as someone who, when I was 8, between the ages of 8 and a teenager, was like, yeah, Artemis is gonna grow up one day. Because that's how you think when you're a kid. That is your brain. You see two characters who have a really good dynamic together, and age is just a number when you are a child because you don't think of things that way. When I was a child, I thought that 16 would be old enough to date Orlando Bloom, who's 17 years older than I am. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm definitely gonna go for that once I'm 16, because that's old enough to be dating a 35-year-old. Kids are dumb. What I'm trying to say is kids are dumb. There was even this one super popular fanfic at the time where Artemis and Holly have to go back in time to fix a thing and rescue a lemur, and Artemis gets magically aged up to be in his 20s, and Holly gets magically aged down to be in her 20s, and they kiss at one point, and oh no. This joke would have read a lot better if I still had the dust jacket, but the point is that's this book. And there was also that one fic where Artemis, it was kind of weird. He developed some kind of really kind of looking back grossly written mental illness that turned him magically into a nice person for a while, and he spends the entire time like hitting on Holly and writing little sonnets for her, and again, this joke would have worked a lot better if I had the dust jackets, but Owen Culver. Yeah, there's also that line in the last one where Artemis tells Holly that he was a broken boy and she fixed him, and yeah, that line made me cry a lot when I first read it. Whatever, it was a good line, damn it. So I think Disney aging down Holly was sort of an act of preemptive self-defense in case the series really took off. I don't think that they're going to word for word adapt any of these books, even the first one, just from what I've seen. But it's like they're copying to the fact that that dynamic exists, and that a lot of kids would see these two characters in a book and go, yeah, they're clearly in love. But I think one of the big things about that problem is that it's a book problem? I'm gonna say it's a book problem, because when you're reading these books, especially as a kid, Artemis doesn't read as a kid. He doesn't read as a 12-year-old. You know, he reads as an adult, and Holly reads as his intellectual equal. And, you know, when you're a kid, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. I feel like the situation would have been a bit different with the visual medium of film, where we would see a literal grown-ass woman talking to a literal child. Like, I feel like the Holly Artemis shipping would have been not as much of a thing as I think Disney was afraid it was going to be, and have now fully copped to, potentially. And here's the thing, I guess aging down Holly in anticipation of that is sort of a fix? But is it? Is it? Because people are still gonna go back and read yeah, I dropped the book. People are gonna go back and read these books, and they're going to see the description of Holly as a grown person. And so you're not really fixing it, Disney, especially if you make them like canon in the movie. If you get them together, and then people are gonna go back and read the books and go, wait a second, that's a problem. Or, and I hope that they're not doing this, but they could be doing a Twilight thing where it's like, well, Holly is a 30-year-old woman who just happens to look like a 12-year-old. Like, if it turns out to be a Twilight thing, I am going to come right back here and stack up these boxes because I don't have a tripod, and I am going to scream into the void for a good 20 minutes. Just out of sheer Disney, what are you doing? Disney, what are you doing? So ostensibly, aging down Holly isn't necessarily the biggest deal. Again, I feel like the whitewashing thing is worse, but it does undercut certain elements of the story. I mean, part of the reason why the dynamic between Artemis and Holly worked as friends is because Artemis had the intelligence of an adult, but not the emotional intelligence of an adult. And Holly had the streetwise, take none of your shit emotional intelligence of an adult that Artemis not only needed, but could learn to respect. That's kind of a big thing. Especially because in the books, you forget that Artemis is a kid, and that's kind of the point. It's harder to forget that Artemis is a kid when he's on screen and, you know, a 12-year-old child just like standing there. Like you're not gonna forget that that kid is in like grade 7. But when you're reading the books, you do. And it's kind of brilliant that you do, because these moments when it calls back to the fact that he is a child is actually kind of a shock. It sort of wakes you back up into that moment of like, oh my god, this is a very misguided kid. And kids have a chance to grow and change in a way that adults don't. And so having that dichotomy of an adult recognizing this, like that moment just doesn't work the same way if your world-weary, you know, streetwise cop is another 12-year-old. So I think that Disney tried to overcorrect and ended up problematizing things that were actually fine, and would have read a lot differently on screen than they would have in the books, but probably for the better. Probably way better in that respect. God, I really hope it's not the Twilight thing. So I keep saying that the Artemis Fowl books are hard to adapt. And I think that they're especially hard to adapt for Disney. I honestly don't know, well, I know from a business perspective why Disney would take on this property, but from a brand perspective, I have no idea why they thought this was a, like, in any ways conducive to their brand. The general arc of a Disney character is you get this optimistic, bright, young spark of a thing who really wants something. And as they go through their adventures, they become kind of disillusioned by the thing that they want, often getting what they want and realizing that it wasn't actually what they wanted all along. So you have that moment of dark night of the soul, but then they rise up from the disillusionment and they end up getting what they need instead. And that is the arc of a Disney child. That's not the arc of Artemis Fowl. The arc of Artemis Fowl starts way past that point of disillusionment and disappointment. In fact, there's never even a moment really of disillusionment and disappointment, because this child has known what's up and what's expected of him basically since the cradle. You never get the sense that Artemis at any point thought that life was fair. You know, you never get that sense of, ooh, I am optimistic about life, no matter what the Disney brief tells you. That is just not who Artemis is. Artemis has figured out that life kind of sucks and is now just looking for a way to exploit it. And that's a really dark place to start any kind of character arc. It is a villain arc. It is an anti-hero arc. His eventual disillusionment moment doesn't come from realizing that life isn't fair. It comes from realizing that life isn't fair, but that doesn't give you license to be a bad person. Like, that is his dark night of the soul, is realizing that he has a choice and that he's making the wrong fucking choices. The Artemis Fowl books are dark and weird. They are intensely dark and intensely weird. And if you were an intensely dark and intensely weird kid, which I was, and I'm sure many of you were, like, it spoke to you because of that, you know? You kind of wanted to see someone have a bit more of a grown-up arc. Like, I really liked Harry Potter when I was a kid. I really liked Lord of the Rings. And I still do. I have a 5-foot poster of Legolas in my room that I have had since I was 8. But when it comes to media that like kind of spoke to me in a really personal way, like that was the Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, that was the kind of stuff that you look up to and you kind of wish that you were like that. Artemis Fowl was having that one best friend who really gets you and who gets you just like down pat and will call you out for the nonsense things that you do. That was Artemis Fowl for a lot of us. So Artemis Fowl was never in adaptation going to fit that branding. The entire arc, the entire aesthetic, the entire storyline was just never going to make for a good Disney movie. And even just looking at it from a film perspective on the whole, like, was there any studio that could have sat down and adapted Artemis Fowl successfully? I honestly don't think so. You know, there are just some books that are borderline impossible to adapt for a movie or any kind of visual medium. Again, the whole sting at the end of the book of realizing that at the end of it all, Artemis was just a child doesn't really make sense in a movie context because we're gonna know that he's a kid the whole damn time. And there are elements in the book as well that just work better in the books. They're funnier in the books. You don't have to think about the digestive system of a dwarf too much in the books. It goes into it, but I was gonna make a poop joke, but I won't. But you know, you never have to sit down and actually look at the visceral ass of a dwarf shitting out dirt so that he can continue tunneling. Did anyone else notice that Mulch just kept like developing new powers and secret abilities throughout every book? Like I think the second one was when it was like, ooh, I have healing saliva and my pores stick to walls. And then the third or fourth book it was like, oh, I can actually make a helmet out of my own spit. Like as the books went on, it's like Mulch was just a nice little plot Swiss Army knife. Forgot about that. Look, I'm not saying that the books were perfectly written. I am not saying that at all. But even if we weren't looking at making a completely faithful adaptation of Artemis Fowl, like, I don't know, I think there's a room for the child villain, like an actual bad kid who gets called out for being bad and has to learn to grow up to be a better person than he was when he was a child. I feel like there's room for that storyline. And maybe Artemis Fowl wasn't necessarily the visual adaptation that was gonna capture that ever, no matter what studio was producing it. But now we've got this kind of toothless Disney thing coming out. And again, I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know. Maybe it's going to be a good movie in its own right. I don't think so, but it could be. I just don't think it's gonna be a good Artemis Fowl movie, because I don't know if that's possible. So, fun fact, while I was filming, the camera battery died, and then I think I accidentally did something to the focus, so if the angle and the zoom is a bit different now, that's why. I'm not a filmmaker. I just got really angry about Artemis Fowl. Well, anyway, let's get back to it. So I guess what I'm saying is that within this context, when the movie comes out, it's not necessarily useful to examine it on its merits of being an adaptation of Artemis Fowl. I think we can just throw that right out the window from the get. Like, I mean, we can talk about lost opportunities when it comes to representation, and we can talk about zany choices that they made, but you know, at the end of the day, it's just not going to be an Artemis Fowl movie, and I think we kind of have to be at least somewhat okay with that, because honestly, Like, if you're a fan of Artemis Fowl, if you have read through these books, can you honestly tell me that you could see a vision of it functioning in any way, shape, or form as a blockbuster movie? Because I love movies, and I love books, and I like long-form HBO series, which I think is actually one of the best ways to adapt any kind of long-running book series. And I can't see a single way that they would have been able to do this. I think that there are better ways that they could have done this thing if they were going to go ahead and do it. But I just don't think that it would have ever really had a chance of being a faithful, good adaptation. Just straight off the top. Like, we still have these books where Artemis Fowl is an asshole and a bad person who slowly, painfully learns to become a good person. And I just think that's kind of a better story. But that story's still there. We can still go back and reread some of these books for better or for worse. Well, thank you so much for watching this thing. I'm assuming you're watching this thing because you would have to be watching it to see this part. I am planning on making more videos like this, probably a little bit more structured, a little bit going more in depth, and a little bit less me getting incensed about Artemis Fowl for however long this video is going to be. If you want to see more of this content, I like hearing from people. If you think that I'm completely wrong and Disney is going to give an amazing adaptation, please let me know in the comments down below, because that's what all the YouTubers say. Comment, like, subscribe, validate my presence on this earth, and maybe follow my Twitter, because like that's where I'm mostly active and where all of my phone data goes anyways. Go read the books and see Artemis Fowl in theaters in 2019. Oh my god.